The Department of Justice published over 3 million documents related to deceased sex offender Jeffrey Epstein at the end of January. This comes over a month past the deadline the Epstein Files Transparency Act gave the DOJ to release all of their documents related to the disgraced financier. Included in the latest batch of documents are emails that give a glimpse into Epstein's relationships with the rich and powerful, as well as materials related to the government's criminal investigations into Epstein and his associate, convicted sex offender Ghislaine Maxwell. Barry Levine, author of The Spider, Inside the Criminal Web of Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, joins Forbes True Crime to discuss what he's learned from the latest batch of documents. Hi everybody, I'm Brittany Lewis, the host of Forbes True Crime. Joining me once again is Barry Levine, who has been covering Jeffrey Epstein for years. He's also the author of The Spider, a book that investigates Epstein's criminal network. Barry, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you as always, Brittany. Always happy to speak to you.
On Friday, the Department of Justice released over 3 million more documents related to convicted sex offender and disgraced financier Jeffrey Epstein. From everything you've been able to see so far, the thousands of documents and emails and reports and photos and videos, what are some of your takeaways?
Well, I've certainly been going through the documents as best as I can, nonstop, with a couple hours of sleep. And there's just so much material, obviously, to get to. I think that, way back when in the summer, I wrote an op-ed piece for the New York Times, raising 9 different questions of things I'd like to see in those files. And while I am finally seeing some of these things, I still have so many questions that remain, even from the material that's been released. And I'll just jump around here. For instance, I located Jeffrey Epstein's autopsy report because there's still a great many people who think that Jeffrey Epstein didn't take his life and may have been murdered behind bars. And while the autopsy report was included in full from the medical perspective of Dr. Kristen Roman from the New York Medical Examiner's Office, who conducted the autopsy, the biggest question I had has not been answered, which was there any DNA testing done on the ligature that was wrapped around his neck to determine if there were anybody else who was holding that at the time when he was hanged. And certainly DNA testing on that bed sheet that he used would help tell us if someone else was involved in his death. And as best as I can find, there hasn't been any DNA testing done on that. So that's very frustrating to hear, because I don't think without real DNA testing, we'll know if there was anyone else involved in his death. So, I came away from that kind of upset in the sense that the documents could have shown more. Now, the other big factor that I have been looking into really from the beginning of this investigation into Jeffrey Epstein, in the years even before I started my book, were the other individuals involved in the sex trafficking. And I was really hoping that these files would finally answer some of these questions. Now, for background, I just want to briefly say that Virginia Giuffre, who since took her life this past year, who was the most vocal accuser of Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, she, of course, had named several men in court depositions and court papers and interviews. Of course, most famously was Prince Andrew, who has subsequently lost his title in England in terms of being a royal there, and has really, faced unbelievable outrage across the world as to his alleged actions involving Virginia. She, of course, also named prominent billionaires who were connected to Jeffrey Epstein. She named some politicians, a governor, a senator, someone from the entertainment television industry. So we had a list of about a dozen names from Virginia. And what I really found most interesting this past summer, when we were attempting to get the files released and the survivors were holding rallies, and Representative Thomas Massie and Ro Kahana were spearheading the Transparency Act to get that passed, excuse me, is that Thomas Massie had outlined the fact that he had come across 20 names of men. And I will just quote him as saying that these were men who, according to FBI 302 witness reports, these were the 20 alleged men who took part in Epstein's sex trafficking. Now, while he didn't name them, I do believe that some of those men were on Virginia Giuffre's list. He described them as one Hollywood producer worth a few $100 million, one royal prince, which I think we can assume was Prince Andrew, one high-profile government official, one high-profile former politician, one owner of a car company in Italy, one rock star, one magician, at least 6 billionaires, including a billionaire from Canada. So this was really kind of bombshell news from Representative Thomas Massie when he read through that list. Now, of course, I immediately began searching through the files to see if I could find those FBI 302 witness reports. And while there are some of those reports, they are, the majority of them are completely redacted. I mean, entire pages that are blacked out where you don't see anything. And that's extremely frustrating. Now, in further digging, and also digging that took part by the New York Times over the past few days, we have found two key documents that reference third parties. One of them is a 21-page slide presentation that the Justice Department compiled into their investigation in Epstein, which included allegations of sexual misconduct against numerous powerful men. Now, of course, while none of these men have been charged, the men included President Trump. The FBI also compiled a summary of accusations against Trump, the billionaire financier here in New York, Leon Black, who we know had a long association with Jeffrey Epstein. Of course, the former Prince Andrew, now Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. The slide presentation did not say that the Justice Department had verified any of these claims. The cover page included the logo of the FBI's Child Exploitation and Human Trafficking Task Force, and the presentation also listed other prominent men who witnesses say were involved in sexual activity, though not necessarily misconduct. Now, in that category, that included former President Bill Clinton and Leslie Wexner. Leslie Wexner, of course, was the CEO of the limited company. He was Jeffrey Epstein's initial main benefactor. Jeffrey Epstein had power of attorney for Leslie Wexner for many years, up until Jeffrey Epstein's arrest in Florida and the non-prosecution agreement in 2007. Leslie Wexner subsequently said that Jeffrey Epstein had stolen millions and millions of dollars from him, and of course denied any wrongdoing as part of any sex trafficking. Now that slide, there's a slide in that presentation that is in the new FBI files, and the slide is titled "Prominent Names," and it briefly summarizes accusations against President Trump, Harvey Weinstein, New York financier Glenn Dubin, Prince Andrew, Jess Staley. Jess Staley was the key banker at J.P. Morgan Chase, who really was Jeffrey Epstein's point person for many years. In addition to Jess Staley, you have Leon Black, Leslie Wexner, Alan Dershowitz, the lawyer who Jeffrey Epstein used for his non-prosecution agreement, Bill Clinton, Howard Lutnick, of course, the Commerce Secretary in Trump's administration, and also names William Barr and Leon Black. Now, again, these are summary accusations against these individuals. There's no specific charges from any of these men, and the FBI, of course, has pointed out that majority of these claims are unverified and haven't been corroborated. Now, the other main piece of evidence that we found that really discusses any third parties who are involved in the sex trafficking is a very detailed 86-page prosecution memorandum. And this is, over the 86 pages, there's many pages that you can clearly read through from the beginning to end, but there's many additional pages that are heavily redacted. And at the end, there's almost a dozen pages that are fully redacted, to my frustrations in terms of really understanding what they have here. It's important to note that this memo was drawn up 4 months after Jeffrey Epstein's death in 2019. It was compiled for the U.S. Attorney Jeffrey Berman at the time to, quote, analyze the extent to which certain of Epstein's associates and employees may or may not be criminally liable for their conduct during their employment with Epstein. Now, as we know, the only individual besides Jeffrey Epstein that was charged, of course, was Ghislaine Maxwell, who was successfully prosecuted by the DOJ and now is behind bars serving 20 years for sex trafficking. A prominent name in this document is Jeffrey Epstein's longtime assistant and scheduler, Leslie Groff. Now, she's an important individual because she was one of the 4 women who was given immunity at the time of Jeffrey Epstein's 2007 non-prosecution agreement. The other 3 women, Nadia Marcinkova, Adriana Ross, and Sarah Kellen, were all schedulers. These were 4 women who worked under Ghislaine Maxwell, who scheduled the girls, scheduled the massages, and really just kind of took care of all the ordering things as mundane as ordering food being delivered to the Palm Beach house and doing all different types of tasks for Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. Now, to me, the most important elements of this memo are the men that were named that at least at this point in 2009, the DOJ was taking a serious look at. And the names in this memo are Jean-Luc Brunel, who was, of course, the French modeling agent who, as we know from my own investigation, from survivors and from police investigations, he sent, I wouldn't say dozen, I would say hundreds of girls overseas from Eastern Europe and other places to Jeffrey Epstein. He was maybe the key international facilitator of girls, underage girls, minors, who took part in the sex trafficking. And so his name as part of this absolutely makes sense. Now, he was charged separately from the Epstein case on rape charges in Paris, France, and it's believed that he took his life, similar to Jeffrey Epstein, behind bars in Paris, France. Interestingly, his death followed closely Jeffrey Epstein's death behind bars. So he, of course, is no longer with us. The other names in this document, of course, focus on Leon Black, Jess Staley, the banker, Leslie Wexner, and Harvey Weinstein. And as I say, there's no indication in the memo of the specific investigative efforts by the DOJ to corroborate witnesses or evidence. So that's kind of where the files have left us. And they've left me now with even more questions that I have. than I initially had last summer, because we've opened up a Pandora's box here, and the DOJ has teased us with information about these key individuals in Jeffrey Epstein's web, but they haven't specifically detailed the investigative efforts they made to either include these men or discount them as part of the sex trafficking. So that's kind of where we are, Brittany.
I mean, thank you, A, so much for breaking that down. But B, I was going to ask you if this left you with more questions than answers, right? Because as you said, a lot of people are named, a lot of allegations thrown out there, a lot of unverified allegations. The FBI says, hey, we can't corroborate this. So I know you've had questions since 2020 of how the sex trafficking enterprise operated and who was involved. So now when we sit here, we're 3 more million documents deep here. How much did all of these documents, did everything we learn move the ball when it comes to this story of how much more do we know about how this sex trafficking ring operated? Or are you saying, it makes it even bigger, but with more questions?
I think it makes it even bigger with more questions. I think the survivors, who ultimately are the ones who deserve accountability in this unbelievable case of a predator who just involved the biggest, some of the most powerful men across the world, who he dragged in. They're still scratching their heads in terms of really getting the answers they want. And I feel so bad for the survivors, because I don't know if we're ever going to get any real accountability from this. I mean, it maybe in a future administration may release the remaining 2 million documents that are apparently still being held under privilege, according to Todd Blanche, the Assistant Attorney General. And maybe in those 2 million pages of documents are the answers that we have been looking for, in terms of really understanding what the FBI did to investigate the men that, not only Virginia Giuffre, but that other victims had said they were sex trafficked to, in terms of these important, powerful individuals. So, it's extremely frustrating. I mean, the files, I think, further along the understanding of how Jeffrey Epstein operated in terms of the sexual abuse of these victims. It goes into horrific new details, just stomach-turning details related to the abuse of these victims, not only sexually, but in some cases psychologically. There was one victim that I read about in the files, that Jeffrey Epstein psychologically tortured her about her weight, that she wasn't thin enough, and was always calling her out, calling her names, and some of the stuff that you read, particularly as a father of a daughter, it is excruciating to read these accounts, even more accounts now than we had in the past, of the very specific details of the sexual abuse, the rapes, and just the way he operated. I mean, I had written in my book that he had waved a gun at one of the victims on his island in the Virgin Islands, and the documents show that Jeffrey Epstein, at least according to one witness, an employee, had a gun under the mattress while he was raping some of these victims. Now, you have to ask yourself, what was the purpose of the gun? What was he going to use this gun in some way. It's unclear. But this is a man who, when you read through these files that have been released, was just a monster. He was a monster, but at the same time, he was able to compartmentalize the sexual abuse of these girls. And in the next hour, he was on the phone to some of the most important men across the world, politicians, financial leaders of big banks, people in the entertainment community. It's unbelievable. And we even now have learned so many new stories about men who I find most appalling, who curried up to Jeffrey Epstein after the 2007 arrest and Jeffrey Epstein's conviction for prostitution of a minor. In the years after, he associated with so many well-known individuals who wanted to come to his parties. You take Elon Musk, one of the wealthiest men in the world, who emailed Jeffrey Epstein saying, please invite us to your wildest party. Okay. Then, of course, you had Howard Lutnick, who was Donald Trump's Commerce Secretary. This man was a neighbor in New York of Jeffrey Epstein. He lived next door to Jeffrey Epstein on the Upper East Side. He famously said that years ago, Jeffrey Epstein invited him into his home, and he was taken into the massage room. He saw the massage table, and he left the house saying, this guy's strange. I don't want to have anything to do with him. And these new documents point out that in the years after Jeffrey Epstein's arrest, in the years well after he said he didn't want to associate with him, that he was emailing Jeffrey Epstein to ask him if he could bring his wife and family to his island in the Virgin Islands because they were on a holiday. I mean, this man was thinking in some way that this was like going to Disneyland or something. I mean, this is the island where hundreds of girls were sexually abused. So, it's mind-boggling why these men, smart, powerful individuals, would want to associate themselves with Jeffrey Epstein. The same can be said about Richard Branson, the Virgin CEO. There's many, I would say, embarrassing emails between the two. None of the men I've named have been accused of taking part in any sex trafficking, but you have to wonder why so many of these rich and powerful men wanted to associate with him.
It was shocking, right? Because it wasn't some big secret as to who Jeffrey Epstein was. He was a convicted sex offender since 2008. He pleaded guilty to a sex crime against a minor. Yet you see all of this correspondence, these emails with a ton of rich, powerful, famous people. I mean, it was almost like who wasn't named in these documents, right? And obviously, if you were named in the Epstein files document dump, you're not obviously accused of a crime. That doesn't just mean there's allegations against you here. But do you think people who had this relationship with Epstein, they have something to answer for now? And what have you learned about his relationships with the rich and powerful in these new documents?
Well, certainly there's a lot of men who are now going through damage control because certainly their involvement in these emails have raised questions about their character, and we've already had the powerful England politician Mandelson, who's had to resign his post because Jeffrey Epstein sent thousands of dollars to his partner some years back as some type of a gift. There's an international politician who also had to resign his post in Serbia. I mean, this web extends all over the world. One of the people I find most fascinating in this is Kathy Rumela, who was President Obama's legal counsel in the White House and is now the top lawyer for Goldman Sachs here in New York. And these emails, and we began seeing some of these emails in the previous document dump. Now we've seen even more emails. She was acting, now while she said that she did some legal services for Jeffrey Epstein, these emails show a very, very chummy relationship between the two. Jeffrey Epstein, excuse me, sending her expensive designer bags as gifts, and her thanking him, profusely for these gifts. She was also Jeffrey Epstein emailed her for damage control when different stories were coming out, or different ways of how to handle comments related to accusations made against him. There's a particular email in the new batch of documents that caught my eye that, and this is a case, well-known case in the Epstein circles at the time of Donald Trump's first presidential campaign in 2016. A woman came forward in California under the alias of Katie Johnson, who made accusations in a lawsuit against Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein, saying that she had been a 13-year-old and had been sexually assaulted by both men. At the time, of course, the Trump campaign vehemently denied the accusations, and there's been questions over the years whether these lawsuits, of course, were withdrawn. She was under death threats, her attorney said at the time, and has not surfaced since then. And there's been questions over if there was any credibility to these allegations, or was it just a political hit job on Donald Trump at the time. But when this lawsuit surfaced, Jeffrey Epstein reached out, according to an email in the documents that I read, to Kathy, basically saying, this girl's making accusations against Donald and myself, how should I handle this? It shows the attention that Epstein took when his name was surfaced in connection with Donald Trump's name. So, all of this is extremely, fascinating to understand and to see what was going on behind the scenes with Jeffrey Epstein and who he was reaching out to and what he was saying, not only about Trump, but about, many others in the government.
You told me last year that you believed Jeffrey Epstein would haunt President Trump from his grave. And according to the documents released on the 30th, the FBI received unverified tips alleging sexual assault against President Trump. But the FBI did note in their emails that the tips were secondhand, a lot of them, and there was no way to corroborate them. President Trump has always denied any wrongdoing here. And I want to read what the DOJ said in a statement they released with this document dump. Some of the documents contain untrue and sensationalist claims against President Trump that were submitted to the FBI right before the 2020 election. To be clear, the claims are unfounded and false, and if they have a shred of credibility, they certainly would have been weaponized against President Trump already. There are thousands of Trump-related references in the latest batch of the Epstein documents. Did you learn anything new about the relationship between Epstein and Trump?
Well, I think there was some significant details that came in the document dump around the right around the time of the holidays. before this massive document dump, and that had to do with two things that really stood out to me. One was, and we really learned this for the first time. Now we know, of course, people who have followed the story know that Virginia Giuffre, the main accuser of Prince Andrew and the others, had worked at Mar-a-Lago as a spa attendant, and she was recruited at Mar-a-Lago Spa by Ghislaine Maxwell. Ghislaine Maxwell said she was representing Jeffrey Epstein. At the time, Virginia was 17 years old. She was offered a job to do personal massages with Jeffrey Epstein, and that led to the sexual slavery that Virginia said took place at the hands of Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, that she was, in her words, lent out to numerous men. I mentioned some of the names early on in our interview here. But that gave us, that we knew, of course, was an association with Trump and Mar-a-Lago. And Trump has said in months past that he cut off ties with Jeffrey Epstein, one of the reasons being that Jeffrey Epstein was stealing employees from him. And of course, that can certainly include Virginia Giuffre. What we didn't know until the previous document dump was that Donald Trump's Mar-a-Lago spa was actually sending women over to Jeffrey Epstein's home to conduct massages privately for Jeffrey Epstein. And this is quite shocking. And we know from the previous document dump that that one girl had said, had told her family that, and it got back to Mar-a-Lago, that Jeffrey Epstein had made sexual advances against her. And we've never really received a full explanation as to, in the timeline, when that occurred, what did, why didn't the officials at the Mar-a-Lago spa alert the police to that incident, why it was covered up, how much of that information got back to Trump at the time. So that's relatively eye-opening that Mar-a-Lago was sending women, and in many cases, there's an indication that one girl was a minor, from what I read in the documents, who was sent there. The other thing that was troubling to me from the previous document dump was the fact that Donald Trump had said he never took any flights on Jeffrey Epstein's plane. And the previous document dump showed that, in fact, he did take flights on Jeffrey Epstein's plane. And as the DOJ said in the report, that at least one of the girls on this particular flight with Donald Trump was a victim who was a possible witness for the Ghislaine Maxwell trial. So that placed Donald Trump on the private plane with one of Jeffrey Epstein's victims. And you have to wonder, when this was taking place, what did Donald Trump think of this woman? What did he think the circumstances were in terms of why she was traveling with Jeffrey Epstein at the time? Did they interact? Did he have a conversation with her? It goes to the heart of a question that I've had related to this entire story. And that is why so many of these smart, wealthy, powerful men didn't question why Jeffrey Epstein was surrounding himself with these young girls, and raise it to the point of, should any of this be reported? I wonder about that. And that same document dump, we had photos of former President Clinton swimming in a pool with a young woman who has been identified as a Epstein victim. Now, again, the same question goes to former President Trump that I'm asking of Donald Trump, and that is, at the time you're in the situation, what was your sense of thinking who this person is, why they had access to this situation? Did they interact in terms of, did he ask her who she was, what she was doing? Was there any indication that this girl was in any type of distress? I'm most troubled by these men who have not been accused specifically of sexual wrongdoing, but Donald Trump said years later, I broke things off with him when I learned this about him, the fact that he tried to pick up a young daughter of one of his Mar-a-Lago members, and Trump cut off ties with Jeffrey Epstein. But going back years, why didn't these powerful individuals question what was going on? You have to. There's a quote, not in my book, but in another Epstein book, and Donald Trump said, he once was at Jeffrey Epstein's home, and he saw all these young girls outside of Jeffrey Epstein's swimming pool in Palm Beach, and thought, well, maybe isn't that nice? Jeffrey Epstein is opening up his house to the neighborhood children. Now, I don't know if he said that, meant to say that in a joking way, but these individuals were aware that Jeffrey Epstein had some type of strange connection to these young girls. In fact, and we know this has been verified by one of the witnesses, Jeffrey Epstein took one of his victims to Donald Trump and said, used the quote, isn't this a good one? In a sense of, isn't this, whatever Epstein meant by this, but it was certainly meant in some type of sexual context. So I'm most fascinated through these files of learning about the fact that these men had connections with Jeffrey Epstein, but none of them alerted the authorities as to what might have been going on. And that also goes to the co-executors of Jeffrey Epstein's estate, his lawyer, his accountant, who for years must have had a sense that something was not right with Jeffrey Epstein. Some of the files I just read, in fact, this morning, showed that Epstein had his accountant send $250,000 without any question to a young woman. So it raises questions as to the people around him had to have a sense that something was going on, but nobody was willing to alert authorities. And this went on for many, many years.
I think it's really interesting that a lot of the people named, the high-profile names in these documents, they're people that have had years-long relationships with Jeffrey Epstein. They've been at least acquaintances, and now they're kind of going back on their relationships, but they had these standing relationships before. I know Melinda Gates, in an interview, she said she met Jeffrey Epstein one time, and this isn't her verbatim, but essentially she said, he freaked me out so much, it sent a shiver down my spine. That was the gist of what she said. But I want to turn to something you mentioned earlier, and it was that photo of former President Bill Clinton. He was in a hot tub, and that was from a previous release. But you saw in this release, there were really sinister photos of Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. He's known as the former Prince Andrew. There were photos of him crouched down next to a woman who was lying down. At one point, he had her hand on her stomach. I mean, it really was chilling, and he was looking directly at the camera. But when you've seen all of these dumps related to the Jeffrey Epstein files, you see photos that are embarrassing, like Bill Clinton's photo, like this photo of the former Prince Andrew, like men in their underwear. And a lot of it was before social media, or at least before social media was super prevalent. They wouldn't be photos that you would post online now. Certainly back then, they wouldn't be photos that you would hang up in your house. They wouldn't be photos that you put in the scrapbook, that you put in the family photo album. So why do all of these photos exist? Do you think it was for blackmail? I mean, what do you make of this?
In terms of the photos, yeah, I do believe that a lot of this was for blackmail purposes. Jeffrey Epstein he liked doing favors for a lot of these men, and not only financial favors, because he wanted to be in a situation to get something out of them, contributing to their charities. For instance, he had a close association with the former, Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak, who was a guest at Jeffrey Epstein's home many times. Jeffrey Epstein orchestrated financial deals for Mr. Barak with Leslie Wexner. So he would put people together. He was like a ringleader. He would put various people together so they could make money through different ways, through different business dealings and so forth. He was very good at that. But when he had people not only at his island but at his various homes, and particularly individuals who were keen to some of the more extravagant behavior, I absolutely believe that those photos were for blackmail purposes. I mean, for instance, these new documents show photos of former Prince Andrew on all fours, standing over, not standing over, but leaning over a young woman who is her face is obviously blacked out. These are incriminating photos. Those photos are just splashed on the front page of the London Sun the other day with a headline, something like, shame on you, or something like this. I mean, why these men would allow themselves to be photographed this way? Why former President Clinton would allow himself to be photographed in a pool with a girl? Why Prince Andrew would allow those types of pictures taken? It just boggles the mind. Steve Bannon, of course, spent a lot of time with Jeffrey Epstein, giving him advice to, in a way to rehabilitate his reputation, which of course really would have been impossible, even at the time. But he spent a lot of time with Jeffrey Epstein. And there's a picture that I've always found fascinating, and that is Steve Bannon sitting across from Jeffrey Epstein. Jeffrey Epstein is sitting in his chair at his desk, and right in front of Jeffrey Epstein on his desk is a photo that appears to show a very young girl who's incapacitated, who is passed out. Now, why would a man have a photo framed on his desk of a minor who is passed out? I'm sure Steve Bannon saw that photo. Steve Bannon is a smart individual and led a news organization. I'm sure he saw that photo. What was he thinking? What was he thinking that he's interviewing this person, talking to this person, and this man has this picture of this incapacitated minor on his desk? Why didn't he leave there and alert and call the police? I mean, I'm just it boggles my mind as to these individuals who were up close with Jeffrey Epstein, who saw things, but never thought to alert authorities.
I mean, every detail after every detail is more stunning than the next. It's really, some of this stuff, a lot of this stuff is just chilling. But Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche, he said the review's over after these millions of documents were released. Is this it? I mean, I know at the beginning of this interview, you said you still have more questions than answers. And I know no one has had time from when these were released on Friday to review all over 3 million of them. But I mean, what other questions do you still have that you want answered imminently?
Well, I think that maybe this is where the lawmakers, Thomas Massie and Ro Khanna, the Oversight Committee, who are calling in witnesses, who are trying to get down to the bottom of things. Senator Ron Wyden, who is going down the financial trail, looking at over $1 billion of not illegal, but suspicious wire transfers that Jeffrey Epstein sent through U.S. and Russian banks. Some of the men involved, he's focused on Leon Black and his investigation. At the top of my list would be, why can't we see the FBI 302 reports that Thomas Massie has talked about involving these 20 men? And even if you can't release their identities, we need to see exactly what they've been accused of. And if, in fact, the DOJ took any efforts to corroborate the accusations by trying to interview these men, by turning up other evidence. What did they do? I mean, if you have at least 20 302 reports involving 6 billionaires, people in government, people in the entertainment industry, these are all powerful individuals. I mean, the DOJ has prosecuted, famous people. Most recently, Sean Combs had been prosecuted. Harvey Weinstein's been prosecuted. Bill Cosby's been prosecuted, although he's out now on a technicality. But the fact is, the Department of Justice has taken on powerful individuals before related to sexual abuse. And why are these men being given a pass? That's what I want to know. And why it seems there was a period of time right after Jeffrey Epstein's death, as I referred to that 86-page prosecution memorandum that was drawn up for Jeffrey Berman at the time with the SDNY. It seemed at that time they did take on Ghislaine Maxwell and successfully prosecuted her with 4 witnesses who testified against her at trial in New York. But why did these other men get off the hook? And if so, why can't the survivors at least see what efforts were made to get justice for them? They feel that the government has really, for the most part, turned their back, at least this administration turned their back on them. And, the American public and the survivors are not getting the accountability that they deserve in this particular case. And while this Transparency Act called for all the documents to be released, we have not received all the documents, and so many documents have redactions that it's impossible to decipher what we're reading.
I mean, sometimes when you click on a PDF of an email, all you see are essentially the black boxes of redactions. And I mean, as you said, we're left with a lot of questions, more questions than answers. And as we get, hopefully, more information and more answers, I hope you can come back on and break it down with me. Barry Levine, it is always a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you so much for the conversation.
Thank you, Brittany, for having me on today.